could you ruin everything? I hate you. Don't ever come near me again. I can't believe it. We actually did it.
I stood frozen outside my son's room, my hand trembling on the doorknob. Through the crack, I heard her voice, my future daughter-in-law, laughing with her friends. His mother. Oh please, that old woman is so pathetic. Once I marry David, I'll make sure she knows her place. Maybe we'll stick her in a nursing home where she belongs. The wedding was in 48 hours. My son had no idea who he was about to marry, and I had a choice to make: destroy my son's happiness, or let him marry a monster. What I did next changed everything. My name is Margaret, and I'm 58 years old. I've spent the last 30 years of my life being a mother, but the kind who would move mountains for her child. After my husband passed away when David was only 10, it was just the two of us against the world. I worked 2 jobs to put him through college, missed countless nights of sleep to help him with projects, and celebrated every single one of his victories, as if they were my own. David grew up to be everything I hoped for: kind, successful, and compassionate. Or so I thought. When he introduced me to Jessica 6 months ago, I wanted to love her. I really did. She seemed perfect on paper, beautiful, educated, charming in front of David. But there was something in her eyes when she looked at me. Something cold that made my stomach turn. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was just having trouble letting go of my baby boy. I was so wrong. It was a Thursday afternoon, 2 days before the wedding. The house was chaos, flowers being delivered, caterers calling, last-minute adjustments to the seating chart scattered across my dining room table. I had taken the day off work to help coordinate everything because that's what mothers do. Jessica was staying with us for the week, along with her 3 bridesmaids who had flown in from different states. I had gone to the store to pick up some champagne for the bridesmaids. Luncheon we were hosting the next day, but when I got home, I realized I'd forgotten my phone. I'd left it charging in my bedroom, which was right next to the guest room where Jessica was staying. As I climbed the stairs, I could hear laughter, the kind of mean, sharp laughter that instantly makes your skin crawl. The guest room door was slightly ajar, and Jessica's voice rang out crystal clear. "Honestly, I don't know how much longer I can keep up this act," Jessica said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Playing the sweet, loving girlfriend to David is exhausting enough, but pretending to care about his pathetic mother, that's Oscar-worthy performance right there." My blood ran cold. I pressed myself against the wall, hidden from view, barely breathing. One of her friends laughed. "Girl, you are committed. But seriously, is it worth it? I mean, David's sweet and all, but worth it?" Jessica interrupted. "Are you kidding? David's going to make partner at his firm within 2 years. His trust fund kicks in fully when he turns 35. That's $1.2 million, Vanessa. Plus, he's so devoted and stupid that he'll do whatever I say. And his mother. Once we're married, I'm putting my foot down. She's got to go." Another voice chimed in. I recognized it as Brittany, Jessica's college roommate. "What do you mean, got to go?" "I mean exactly that," Jessica said coldly. "David's too attached to her. It's weird and unhealthy. A grown man shouldn't be calling his mother every day. Shouldn't be spending every Sunday having dinner with her. It's pathetic. So I'm going to fix it." "How?" the first friend asked, clearly intrigued. Jessica's voice took on a calculating tone that made my skin crawl. "It's already in motion. I've been slowly planting seeds, little comments here and there about how Margaret is getting older, how she seems forgetful, how she's becoming a burden. Last week, I accidentally told David that I found his mom wandering in the backyard at 2 a.m. looking confused. Total lie, but he bought it." My hand flew to my mouth to stifle a gasp. That conversation had happened. David had come to me worried, asking if I was sleeping okay, if I was feeling confused. I'd been so bewildered because nothing like that had ever happened. "You're evil," one of the friends said, but she was laughing. "I love it. Within 6 months of the wedding, I'll have him convinced that his mother needs professional care." Jessica continued. "There's this nursing home about 2 hours away, far enough that he won't visit often, but not so far that he'll feel guilty. It's perfect. And once she's out of the picture, we can sell her house. It's in a great neighborhood, is silly worth $600,000. David keeps saying he wants to keep it in the family, but I'll convince him we need it for our future children's college fund." I felt like I was going to be sick. The house she was talking about, the house I'd lived in for 30 years, where I'd raised my son, where every corner held memories of my late husband. She was already planning to sell it. And my son, my devoted, loving son, had no idea. What about the wedding? Brittany asked. Are you actually going through with it, or is this just to get the ring? Oh, I'm going through with it, Jessica said firmly. David might be boring in bed, and way too clingy, but he's my golden ticket. I've spent 6 months playing this role. I'm not backing out now. Besides, divorce is always an option if I find someone better. With a good lawyer, I'll get at least half of everything. Probably more if I time it right. The room erupted in laughter. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst through my chest. These women were talking about my son like he was a business transaction, like his feelings meant nothing. And Jessica, this woman I'd welcomed into my home, who I'd stayed up late, helping to make wedding favors, who I'd defended to my friends. When they said something felt off, she was a monster. I somehow made it back to my bedroom without making a sound. I sat on the edge of my bed, my phone clutched in my shaking hands. And I faced an impossible choice. Do I tell David what I'd heard? Do I blow up his wedding, break his heart, and risk him not believing me? Jessica was good, really good. She'd been playing this role for 6 months. And David was completely convinced she loved him. If I told him now, 48 hours before the wedding, with 200 guests coming, with deposits paid and non-refundable flights booked, would he even believe me? Or would Jessica twist it, make it seem like I was a jealous, overprotective mother who couldn't let go? She'd already laid groundwork, already planted seeds about my mental state. It would be so easy for her to say I was confused, imagining things, desperate to keep my son to myself. And what if he chose her anyway? What if love, or whatever he thought was love, made him blind to the truth? I could lose my son forever, and Jessica would win. She'd isolate him, take everything from him, and destroy the kind, trusting man I'd raised. I spent that entire night awake, my mind racing through scenarios. I couldn't eat, couldn't think about anything else. By morning, I'd made my decision. I wasn't going to tell David, not directly. Not yet. Because if I'd learned anything in my 58 years, it's that some people need to see the truth with their own eyes. Telling someone they're about to marry a monster rarely works. But showing them, that's different. I was going to let Jessica expose herself, and I was going to make sure everyone saw it happen. The next day was the rehearsal dinner. I moved through the day like I was in a trance, playing my role perfectly. I smiled at Jessica. I hugged her. I told her how beautiful she looked, and she smiled back. That same fake, saccharine smile she'd been giving me for 6 months. But now, I could see it for what it was, a mask. During the rehearsal at the church, I pulled the wedding planner aside. Her name was Patricia, and we'd worked closely together for the past 3 months. She was professional, efficient, and most importantly, she had access to everything, including the sound system. Patricia, I need a favor, I said quietly, pulling her into a corner. It's about the reception tomorrow. Of course, Margaret. What do you need? You know how we planned for David to give a speech, and then the best man, and then me. She nodded. I'd like to change my speech. I have a video I want to show instead, a tribute to David and Jessica. But I want it to be a surprise. Patricia's face lit up. Oh, that's lovely. David will be so touched. Do you want me to cue it up with the AV team? Yes, but here's the thing, I want it to play right after my toast. I'll give a short speech, and then I want the video to play immediately. Can we set that up without telling anyone? I want it to be a complete surprise. Absolutely. Just send me the video file, and I'll coordinate with the AV team. They'll have it ready to go on your signal. That afternoon, I did something I never thought I'd do. I took my phone, and I went back upstairs to the guest room. The bridesmaids had gone out for spa appointments, but they'd be back soon. I needed to work fast. I'd done my research the night before. There are apps, dozens of them, that can record audio remotely. That can be activated from another device. I set up my old iPad that I rarely used anymore, positioned it carefully behind some decorative pillows on the dresser where it wouldn't be noticed, and activated the recording app. Then I linked it to my phone so I could monitor it remotely. I felt guilty doing it. It felt invasive and wrong, but then I remembered Jessica's laugh. Her cold voice talking about putting me in a nursing home, about taking my house, about using my son, and my guilt evaporated. That evening, just as I'd hoped, The bridesmaids returned and gathered in the guest room. I was downstairs, pretending to fuss over seating cards, but I had my phone in my pocket with an earbud hidden under my hair. And I listened. For the first 20 minutes, it was boring small talk discussions about dresses, makeup, the spa treatments they'd gotten. I was starting to think I'd wasted my time when Vanessa brought it up. So, Jessica, last night you said you had the David situation handled. What's the plan for after the honeymoon? Are you really going through with the whole nursing home thing? My entire body tensed. This was it. Jessica laughed. Oh, absolutely. I've actually already researched a few places. There's one called Meadowview that's perfect. It's expensive enough that David won't feel guilty. But their visiting hours are really restricted. And it's far enough away that he won't be able to just pop in whenever he wants. Doesn't that seem harsh? A voice I didn't recognize asked. I mean, she's his mom. Please, Jessica scoffed. She's a burden and a roadblock. Every time David and I try to make plans, it's but my mom this, and my mom needs that. I didn't sign up to marry a mama's boy. I signed up for the lifestyle his money can provide. And that old woman is in my way. The conversation continued. And it was even worse than what I'd heard the day before. Jessica laid out her entire plan how she'd convince David I was mentally declining. How she'd suggest the nursing home was for my own safety. How she'd slowly sell off my belongings and keep the money for our future. She talked about manipulating David's emotions, about playing the concerned wife, who was just trying to do what was best. But the worst part came near the end. What if David gets suspicious? Brittany asked. He's not stupid, Jess. Eventually, he might figure out what you're doing. Jessica was quiet for a moment. Then she said, in a voice so cold it made my blood freeze, then I'll divorce him. But not before I make sure I'm pregnant. Child support from David's income would set me up for life. And if he tries to fight me on custody, I'll make sure everyone knows what a controlling, emotionally unstable man he is. I've got 6 months of text messages of him checking in on me, asking where I am, wanting to spend time together. It's easy to spin that as obsessive behavior. I'll destroy him if I have to. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped the phone. This wasn't just about protecting myself anymore. This was about saving my son from someone who would ruin his life, take his money, use his children as pawns, and walk away without a shred of remorse. I had everything I needed. The recording was clear, undeniable, damning. But I still had one more step to take. The morning of the wedding. I woke up at 5 a.m. I hadn't really slept, maybe an hour or two of fitful dozing, but I felt strangely calm. I knew what I had to do, and I knew it was right. I spent the morning getting ready in a daze. Hair, makeup, the dress I'd bought, specially for this day, a lovely lavender gown that David had said made me look beautiful when I'd shown him. Every time I looked in the mirror, I thought about how this day was supposed to be one of the happiest of my life. My only son, getting married, starting a new chapter. Instead, I was about to blow up his world, but I was also about to save him. The ceremony was at 2 p.m. It was beautiful, I'll admit that. The church was decorated with white roses and hydrangeas, sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows. David looked so handsome in his tuxedo, his face glowing with happiness as he stood at the altar, waiting for his bride. When Jessica walked down the aisle, she was stunning. Her dress was everything a wedding dress should be, sophisticated, breathtaking. Everyone in the church gasped at how beautiful she looked. And all I could think was, monster. You're a beautiful monster, and you're about to be exposed. The ceremony went off without a hitch. David's vows were heartfelt and genuine, full of promises about love and partnership, and growing old together. Jessica's vows were perfect too. She'd probably rehearsed them 100 times to get just the right amount of emotion in her voice. She cried on cue, laughed on cue, played her role flawlessly. When the officiant said, "You may kiss the bride," I felt my stomach drop. They were married now, legally bound, but I reminded myself this was still fixable. Annulments existed, and what I was about to do would absolutely qualify as grounds for one. The reception was held at a beautiful venue, overlooking the water. Everything was perfect, the decorations, the food, the music. Our guests were having a wonderful time, completely unaware that in a few hours, this perfect wedding would become the most talked about scandal in our social circle. Dinner was served. And then it was time for the toasts. The best man went first, David's college roommate, who told funny stories about their time in school. Everyone laughed in all the right places. Then it was my turn. I stood up, and the room quieted down. Patricia, the wedding planner, gave me a subtle nod from across the room. Everything was ready. The AV team had the video loaded and ready to play on all the screens. Positioned around the reception hall, I picked up my champagne glass and looked around at all the faces looking back at me. Friends, colleagues. David was smiling at me with so much love and trust, and Jessica was smiling too. But I could see the calculation behind it, the impatience. She just wanted this part over with, so she could get back to playing the happy bride. Good evening, everyone, I began, my voice steadier than I expected. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Margaret, David's mother. I've been looking forward to this day for a very long time. Watching your child get married is supposed to be one of the greatest joys of parenthood. Seeing them find someone who loves them, who will support them, who will be their partner in life. I paused, taking a sip of champagne. I've spent the last 6 months getting to know Jessica, watching her interact with my son, observing the way she presents herself, and I have to say, she's been absolutely remarkable. The performance she's given has been truly Oscar-worthy. A few people laughed awkwardly, not quite sure where I was going with this. David's smile faltered slightly. Jessica's eyes narrowed, just a fraction. But as a mother, my job isn't to just accept what I'm shown at face value. My job is to protect my child, even when they're grown, even when it's hard. So I did something that I'm not particularly proud of, but that I know in my heart was necessary. I listened. I paid attention. And I discovered the truth about who Jessica really is. The room had gone completely silent now. David was starting to look concerned. Jessica's face had gone pale, but she was still trying to maintain her smile, rather than just tell you what I discovered. I thought I'd let Jessica speak for herself. What you're about to hear is a recording from 2 days ago, when Jessica and her bridesmaids were discussing the future she had planned for my son. I nodded to Patricia, and suddenly, Jessica's voice filled the room, crystal clear through the professional sound system. Honestly, I don't know how much longer I can keep up this act. Playing the sweet, loving girlfriend to David is exhausting enough, but pretending to care about his pathetic mother, that's Oscar-worthy performance right there. The reaction was immediate. Gasps filled the room. People turned to look at Jessica, whose face had gone from pale to completely white. David looked like he'd been struck, his mouth opening and closing but no words coming out. But the recording kept playing. Every word, every cruel laugh, every calculated plan. The nursing home. Selling my house. The comments about David being boring and clingy. The plan to divorce him and take half his money. The threat to use future children as weapons against him. It played for 5 minutes that felt like an eternity. Some people tried to leave too uncomfortable to listen. Others were frozen in their seats, unable to look away from the train wreck unfolding before them. Jessica's bridesmaids had all gone white as sheets. Vanessa had actually started crying. When the recording finally ended, the silence in the room was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop. Jessica was the first to speak. That's not real. She faked it. She edited it somehow. This is insane, David. You know I would never. But David wasn't looking at her. He was looking at me, and his eyes were filled with tears. Mom, he said hoarsely, is this real? I met his eyes steadily. Every word, sweetheart. I'm so sorry, but I couldn't let her destroy you. What happened next was chaos. Jessica tried to maintain her innocence, but the bridesmaids faced with a room full of witnesses and knowing they'd been caught on. Recording started talking. Vanessa, in particular, seemed eager to distance herself from Jessica, confirming that every word on the recording was real and that they'd had similar conversations multiple times. Over the past few months, David just stood there, looking like his entire world had shattered, because it had. The woman he thought he loved, the person he'd just vowed to spend his life with, had been using him from the beginning. It was written all over his face, the betrayal, the humiliation, the grief. Jessica's parents tried to defend her at first, but even they seemed shaken. Her father, a stern-looking man who I'd met only a handful of times, took Jessica by the arm and practically dragged her out of the reception hall. We could hear them arguing in the hallway, his voice raised in anger and disbelief. The guests didn't know what to do. Some left immediately, too uncomfortable to stay. Others lingered, whispering amongst themselves, casting pitying glances at David. My sister came up to me, putting her hand on my shoulder. "Oh, Margaret, she said softly. That must have been so hard, but you did the right thing. I wasn't so sure. Looking at David's face, seeing the pain there, I wondered if I'd made everything worse. Maybe I should have told him privately. Maybe there was a better way to handle this that wouldn't have humiliated him in front of 200 people. But then I remembered Jessica's voice on that recording, talking about using his future children against him, about destroying him if he got in her way. And I knew that as painful as this was, it was better than the alternative. David finally moved. He walked over to me, his legs seeming barely able to support him. And he just stood there for a moment, looking at me. Then he pulled me into a hug, and completely broke down, sobbing against my shoulder like he used to do, when he was a little boy and the world had been cruel to him. I'm sorry, I whispered, holding him tight. I'm so sorry, baby. But I had to. She would have destroyed you. I know, he choked out. I know, Mom. I loved her. I thought she loved me. How could I be so stupid? You're not stupid. You're trusting and kind, and you see the best in people. Those are beautiful qualities, sweetheart. She's the one who's broken, not you. We stood there for what felt like hours, though it was probably only a few minutes. When David finally pulled away, his eyes were red and swollen, but there was something else there, too, a grim determination. I need to talk to a lawyer, he said quietly. Can we get this marriage in order? I already called one, I admitted. He's expecting to hear from you tomorrow. With what's on that recording, he says annulment should be misrepresentation. Take your pick. David nodded numbly. Then he turned to address the remaining guests, his voice hoarse but steady. I'm sorry you all had to witness this. I'm sorry for wasting your time and money to be here for what turned out to be a sham, but I want to thank my mother for having the courage to do what I couldn't see needed to be done. She saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life. The next few weeks were difficult. The story spread like wildfire: social media posts, whispered conversations, speculation, and rumors. Jessica tried to do damage control, spinning a story about me being a jealous, controlling mother who had fabricated the recording out of spite. But too many people had been in that room, had heard it with their own ears. And the bridesmaids, once confronted with potential legal consequences for their part in the scheme, were more than willing to testify to the truth. The annulment went through faster than we expected. Jessica's lawyer tried to fight it at first, even tried to claim she might be pregnant to complicate things. But a mandatory pregnancy test proved that was another lie. Within 6 weeks, the marriage was legally dissolved, as if it had never happened. David moved back home with me for a while. He said he needed time to figure things out, to process everything. Some nights, I'd hear him crying in his room, and it broke my heart all over again. I'd done the right thing. But knowing that didn't make it any easier to watch my son suffer. He went to therapy. That was my condition. For him staying with me, that he'd talk to someone professionally about what had happened. He needed to work through the betrayal, the humiliation, the damage to his ability to trust. His therapist was wonderful, helping him see that what happened wasn't his fault, that trusting people isn't a weakness even when that trust is occasionally misplaced. Slowly, over the course of months, David started to heal. He threw himself into work, earned that partnership Jessica had been so confident he'd get. He reconnected with old friends he'd lost touch with during his relationship with Jessica. Friends she'd subtly encouraged him to distance himself from because they didn't understand their relationship. He started dating again eventually, though he was much more cautious this time. I saw the way he'd hold back, the way he'd question and analyze every interaction. It hurt to see him that way, to see how Jessica had stolen some of his natural warmth and openness. But his therapist assured me that this was normal, part of the healing process. People often ask me if I regret how I handled things. They ask if I wish I'd told David privately, instead of exposing Jessica so publicly. And the truth is, I don't regret it. Here's why. If I'd told David privately, Jessica would have had time to prepare. She was smart, manipulative, and she'd already laid groundwork about my mental state. She could have convinced him I was confused, jealous, making things up. She could have played the victim, turned him against me, and isolated him even further. By exposing her publicly, in front of witnesses, with undeniable evidence, I took away her ability to spin the truth. Everyone heard exactly who she was in her own words. There was no room for manipulation, no chance for her to paint herself as the victim of a cruel, jealous mother. Was it humiliating for David? Yes, absolutely. And that was the hardest part, knowing that in saving him, I was also hurting him. But humiliation is temporary. The damage Jessica would have done to him over years of marriage. The way she would have isolated him from everyone who loved him. The financial and emotional destruction she had planned that would have been permanent. The public exposure also served another purpose. It protected other potential victims. Jessica's reputation was destroyed in our social circles. Other men were warned, aware of who she really was. She couldn't easily pull the same con again, at least not in our city. I learned a lot through this experience too. I learned to trust my instincts. From the beginning, something about Jessica had felt off to me. But I'd ignored those feelings because I wanted my son to be happy. I'd let social pressure and my own desire to be supportive override what my gut was telling me. Never again. I also learned that sometimes, being a good parent means making yourself the villain. The easy thing would have been to say nothing. To let David marry Jessica and learn his lesson the hard way. But being a parent isn't about taking the easy path. It's about doing what's best for your child. Even when it costs you something. It's been 2 years since the wedding that wasn't. David is doing well now, really well. He's in a healthy relationship with a woman named Sarah, who I genuinely like. She's kind, she's authentic, and most importantly, she seems to genuinely love my son for who he is, not what he can provide for her. David and I are closer than ever. The experience, as traumatic as it was, taught him that I would always have his back. Even when it meant making impossible choices. He trusts my judgment now, in a way he didn't before. And he's more open with me about his relationships and concerns. We don't talk about Jessica much anymore. She left our city about a year ago, apparently moved across the country, to start fresh somewhere. People didn't know her story. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she tried to pull a similar scheme with another man, but his friends had looked her up online and warned him. The internet has a long memory. David told me recently that he's thinking about proposing to Sarah. He wanted my blessing first, wanted to know what I thought of her. I told him the truth, that Sarah seems wonderful, that I've never seen him happier, and that I support whatever decision he makes. But I also told him something else. Trust your instincts, I said. You're older and wiser now. You know what real love looks like versus what manipulation looks like. And if something ever feels off, don't ignore that feeling. It's okay to question things, to take your time, to protect your heart. He smiled at that, a real smile that reached his eyes. I learned from the best. He said, you protected me when I couldn't protect myself. I'll never forget that, Mom. Looking back, I think one of the hardest parts of the whole experience was grappling with the nature of deception. Jessica had fooled everyone, me, David, his friends, our family. She'd been so good at playing her role that there were moments, even after hearing the recording, where I questioned if I'd misunderstood somehow. That's the thing about skilled manipulators, they make you doubt your own perception of reality. They're so convincing that even when faced with evidence of their deception, part of you wants to believe it's a misunderstanding. It's cognitive dissonance in its purest form. David struggled with this, especially. He spent months in therapy, working through the fact that his entire relationship had been a lie. Every sweet gesture, every I love you, every intimate moment, all of it had been calculated, performed, fake. That kind of betrayal doesn't just hurt, it fundamentally changes how you see the world. His therapist taught him something important, though. She told him that Jessica's ability to deceive him wasn't a reflection of his stupidity or naivete. It was a reflection of his humanity. Normal, healthy people don't go into relationships expecting to be manipulated. They trust because that's how human connections are supposed to work. The problem isn't that David trusted too easily. The problem is that Jessica was broken in a way that allowed her to use that trust as a weapon. And that's on her, not on him. This experience made me think a lot about how we socialize men and women differently. When it comes to relationships, David had been raised to be respectful, to trust his partner, to be emotionally open and vulnerable. Those are all good things. But he hadn't been taught to recognize red flags, to protect himself emotionally, or to understand that some people enter relationships with ulterior motives. We have entire industries dedicated to warning women about dangerous men, podcasts, self-defense classes, online communities where women share stories and warnings. But we rarely talk about the flip side, about women who manipulate and exploit men, who used society's assumptions about gender to their advantage. Jessica knew that if she played the part of the perfect girlfriend, David wouldn't question her motives. She knew that society would be more likely to believe her than him if things went wrong. She'd already started building that narrative by planting seeds about my mental decline, setting up a story where she was the concerned, loving wife dealing with a difficult mother, and it was calculated, cold, and terrifyingly effective. If I hadn't overheard that conversation, if I hadn't gathered evidence, Jessica would have gotten away with it. And David would have spent years, maybe decades, trapped in a marriage with someone who saw him as nothing more than a resource to be exploited. If there's anything I want other parents to take away from my story, it's this: trust your instincts, but verify them with evidence before you act. When something feels off about your child's partner, don't ignore that feeling, but also don't act impulsively. I could have confronted Jessica immediately after overhearing that first conversation, but that would have given her time to prepare a defense, to turn David against me. Instead, I gathered evidence. I made sure I had undeniable proof before I took action. That's crucial. Without that recording, it would have been my word against Jessica's, and she was very good at playing the victim. Also, think carefully about how you expose the truth. In my case, the public exposure was necessary because Jessica was so skilled at manipulation that a private conversation might not have been enough. But every situation is different. The goal isn't to humiliate your child, it's to protect them. And finally, prepare for the aftermath. Exposing a manipulator doesn't make everything instantly better. David needed therapy, time, and support to heal from what Jessica did to him. Be ready to help your child pick up the pieces, even when they're angry or hurt or confused. Despite how painful the experience was, some good things came out of it. David and I have a relationship now that's built on complete honesty and trust. He knows I'll always tell him the truth, even when it's hard to hear, and I know he'll come to me if he's ever worried about something, instead of hiding his concerns to avoid worrying me. Our extended family got closer to my sister, who I'd drifted apart from over the years, became one of my biggest supporters during the aftermath. She helped me deal with the social fallout, stood by me when some people criticized my methods, and was there for David when he needed an aunt to talk to. Even some of David's friends reached out to thank me. One of his college buddies called me a few weeks after the wedding and said, "Mrs. H, I always thought Jessica was off, but David was so happy I didn't want to say anything. Thank you for having the guts to do what the rest of us were too cowardly to do." That meant a lot to me. It confirmed that my instincts had been right, that other people had seen warning signs too, but had stayed silent. Sometimes being the first person to speak up is the hardest thing to do, but it's also the most important. If you're listening to this and you're in a situation where you suspect someone in your child's life is manipulating them, I want you to know you're not crazy. Trust your instincts. Pay attention to the warning signs, and don't be afraid to investigate if something feels wrong. But also remember, gather evidence, think strategically, and prioritize. But also remember, gather evidence, think strategically, and prioritize your child's long-term well-being over short-term comfort. Sometimes love means making the hard choice, being the bad guy temporarily, so that the people we care about can be safe in the long run. To anyone who's been in David's position, who's discovered that someone they loved was using them, I want you to know that it's not your fault. Being trusting isn't a weakness. Being open-hearted isn't stupidity. You deserve someone who loves you for who you are, not what you can give them. And to the Jessicas of the world, people who manipulate and use others without remorse, I hope you understand that the truth always comes out eventually. You might fool people for months or even years, but authentic love and genuine connection will always triumph over calculated deception in the end. 2 years later, I don't regret my decision for a single moment. Yes, it was painful. Yes, it caused temporary chaos and embarrassment. But I saved my son from a lifetime of manipulation, financial exploitation, and emotional abuse. I protected him when he couldn't protect himself, and that's what mothers do. The wedding that never was became the catalyst for David to find real love, to understand his worth, and to build a life with someone who genuinely cherishes him. Sarah makes him laugh in a way Jessica never did. She encourages his relationships with friends and family instead of isolating him. She loves him for who he is, not for what he can provide. And me. I learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is speak up when everyone else stays silent. I learned that protecting the people you love sometimes means making yourself unpopular. And I learned that a mother's instinct is a powerful thing when something feels wrong. It usually is. David's getting married again next spring. This time, I'll be giving a toast that's full of genuine joy and celebration. This time, I'll be welcoming a daughter-in-law who I know will love and respect my son the way he deserves. And this time, the only tears will be happy ones. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to make a difficult choice to protect someone you love, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. Your story might help someone else who's facing a similar situation. And if you enjoyed this story and want to hear more true tales of betrayal, redemption, and quiet strength, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. We share new stories every week about ordinary people facing extraordinary situations and finding the courage to do what's right. Remember, trust your instincts, protect the people you love, and never be afraid to stand up for the truth, even when it's hard. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.